if you focus on the 80% and raising that, what am I doing great? What am I naturally awesome at? And how do I rev that up and stay excited and stay happy and stay enthused
here. So
and really boost what's going well and raise that? What's on the bottom will naturally come up with it. So now you're not only narrowing the gap because you can't help but focus on what's broken, because that will drive.
Welcome to The Point with Jeff Spikes, the show about achieving goals.
Hello and welcome to The Point. This is your host, Jeff Spikes, and what a pleasure it is to be here. This is new. We've come back after a few minutes. We shut down production. We decided that we wanted to take a new change and that you were up for some differences in what you were going to receive, and why you were here might even change, right? As far as who's being attracted to this. And, when we started this podcast, it was under request from a handful of people. We had been talking about it for a long time. There was a reason that we wanted to move forward and have, a podcast. And part of it had to do with my voice, and part of it had to do with getting it out there, getting some of the ideas and the thoughts and what was working for people out there in the public, and also helping me improve my skill of how I speak and how I communicate, because I am a verbal processor. So what does that have to do with you, and why do you care? Well, you may be a verbal processor. If not, you might be you have some other type of a processing style, and you can send us a message and we can help you. We can get you an assessment that will help you understand how you process. So me being a verbal processor, and it being really important to communicate some of how we're driving change, right? We're moving change and moving through change a whole lot easier than ever before. And why that's so important is it's part of my vision and part of my purpose and mission, as far as what I'm meant to do in this world, is to use my voice to help communicate something different from what there was before and how you thought about change. And a lot of that comes from my experience. So some of that comes from the experience I've had from a very young age of taking it upon myself as a natural way of being, some form of responsibility of how to drive change, not just for myself, but for large amounts of people. And for whatever reason, I felt like I was responsible. As a matter of fact, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I thought I could resurrect, save the lives of worms, which might sound a little odd, but as a 4-year-old, I'd see these worms come up to the top of the surface of the ground and end up on the sidewalk when it would rain. And as, of course, the sun comes out and it dries out, and then you have worms left, and they're not living anymore. They dry out. And I remember as a kid feeling concerned about this and thinking, that I could put them back in water. And if I put them back in water, they would come back to life. They'd rehydrate. So simple problem solving, right? And it was a problem that what was going to happen to all the worms if I didn't do this? I felt this obligation. I remember feeling the sense of responsibility that it had to be done. And all was well and good until my dad knocked over a cup of these dried worms, or now wet, and on a suit while he was getting ready to go to work, and that ended fairly quickly. But I share that because there was a sense of obligation and there was a sense of ability that if I could do that, I would do that. Now, fast forward that to many other things, and as I started facing challenges in life, I started taking on this idea that I needed to solve these problems for people other than myself, for my family, for friends. And maybe I've never really let go of that. So, of course, as we grow and we learn, I've also found that there's a lot of things that are out of our control and that I can't necessarily control. But I do believe that I do live in the realm that change is possible. So not only that, but that it can be enjoyable. What keeps change from being enjoyable is my attachment, or your attachment, to what it was like. And what's interesting to me is that we want certain things and don't get them. And just humans, you want something and you end up somewhere entirely different without thinking about it. You naturally move in a way that doesn't get you the result you want. So, of course, I was doing the same thing. I was confused. So I went about life looking at how to change things. I think I initially tried to change my circumstances when I joined the Marine Corps. When I joined the Marine Corps, it was in order to get discipline and focus, because I'd been told my whole life that those are two things I didn't have. And I knew that if I went there, they'd kick me long enough and hard enough. That was my belief. They'd kick me long enough and hard enough that it would ingrain discipline into me and focus, and I'd learn how. And I did it. It worked. I succeeded. I learned 3 valuable things that you can learn from what I have to share here, from the Marine Corps. I took away from that discipline. I took away from it focus. So I learned discipline, focus, and I learned how to be mission driven. So I learned I was already very tenacious. I had big ideas, and I would never give up of the idea of actually achieving and realizing that idea and making sure that that happened. But in the Marine Corps, I learned this mission-driven way of being, and I learned how to actually maintain that and make adjustments along the way that maintained the focus on the end mission. So, of course, the way that I learned to be disciplined and focused was speaking to myself like a drill instructor. And the way that I learned to be mission driven was within the structure of how we made decisions in the Marine Corps, and how we changed the decisions we had made, and how we evaluated and did sit reps and other things where it became clear that something was happening that required an adjustment, and then we'd even plan for those potential obstacles or changes or shifts and know what to do as different scenarios unfolded. So that molded very naturally with my way of thinking and ended up being a really wonderful fit. So let's take a step back really quick and talk about the point. You're going to have an opportunity now to hear something different from us as the point relaunches. And the point is really going to stay focused on 3 or 4 basic things. One is you can clearly change and create and demonstrate any environment you want. So if you're a company, you're wanting a culture, you're a team and you're wanting a subculture, something where you're valuing something very specific that you're being paid to do, and you want to be the group, the team that's achieving it, and that's sometimes then that's something that's working within a greater culture. And one of the things that makes that simpler is that the company's driving the bus on what the goals are. They're giving you what the picture of what you want. If you're watching this, you may know very clearly what you want. And you may have a really big dream, vision, or fantasy. But the difference between a fantasy and a dream and a goal is that in a fantasy, you really have no idea how to get there. You're not even sure you have the skills. It's something you can imagine in your mind being absolutely wonderful. A dream, you can start dreaming about something when you begin putting the skills and the resources together that actually help you get there. And then the goals are the things that happen along the way that you're able to set in smaller time frames. Now, our designing strengths process, if you come join us to design your strengths, is an even smaller goal setting process where you can then learn to design your approach. One of the things that we will consistently talk about here at the point now is about what makes you the most unique individual compared to other people. Now, CliftonStrengths will scientifically show you that your chances of having the same top 5 of 34 strength themes as another person in the same order is 1 to 1.33 million. And that's a ratio that guarantees that you're more than 1 in a million unique. And that's about your approach of how you approach things. Now, many people take the assessment, read the results, and either say that's not me on my personality or it is me on my personality. Some people love having the framework. Some people don't love having the framework. That assessment's extremely powerful. It has more science to it than any other strengths assessment that's out there. And it's absolutely phenomenal. But the gold of it, the magic of it, is your reaction response to the results. It's the experience you had taking the assessment, leading up to taking the assessment, wanting to or not wanting to take the assessment. Once you do take the assessment, getting your results and your first reaction to reading those results. That's where all of the gold is. That's where all of the insights are that are really going to help you have more understanding of who you are and how you're moving forward today, and then considering what you want, how to make the changes. And it gives you a framework of language that, if you were used with other people, puts you in a common framework of language so you can approach change, you can approach getting anything done, you can approach any accomplishment, and have a common framework of language within that movement, right? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about these three things that make you the most unique. The three things that make you unique are your approach to getting anything done. You might ask, well, approach to what? Your approach to accomplishing a task, your approach to being mission driven, your approach to anything. And your approach can change depending on the size of the goal and everything else. But the strengths within the assessment of Clifton Strengths really stays focused on these themes that there's 34 of, that state something about what your strengths are and how you're wired uniquely in how you approach things. But then it gives you potential talents that, should you exercise, should you practice and repeat and put together and try using differently, you can move forward. This is important for you because you may be naturally showing up in a way that is limiting you, but it's the only tool you've got because it's your strength. It's the natural way that you move forward and approach most everything. But in a situation that you're in now, it's the thing you want to hold back and hold more sacred. I was working with someone earlier today that was going through a major life change. And it's a major life change, and they're completely changing environments and people. And it's tenuous. So there's there's legalities involved, and there's some other things, but it's a complete shift away from, being in an environment to now they're going to be in an entirely new, and they don't have the same rules. They don't have the same relationships. They don't have the same structures, and they're able to make all of that fresh in the actual move. One of their gifts is that, and one of their strengths is that they're very adaptable. So if you're highly adaptable, you might be, as a gift, be able to really adjust to how people are coming at you, what's coming towards you, as far as how environments change based on other people's needs, wants, agendas, demands, how they communicate. And that adaptability might be really good in a positive relationship where you're wanting to move forward with others. But when this group that you're not going to be with anymore, these individuals that you're not going to be engaged with anymore, and you're negotiating with them and doing other things, being adaptable to what they need is not always the best answer. So you need, so honing in that gift and making sure you're protecting yourself and not just being the tail wagging the dog, right? That's one of the ways that can happen. But without the awareness that it's even a gift, without knowing that that's a solid way that you show up in a real positive, you might not know that it's also how someone can take advantage. So there's real value in understanding these things that you might not have already known, because when you don't know, you don't know. And oftentimes the greatest part of you is also the thing that is challenging you the most and causing you the most trouble. And that can change as the nuance of life changes, as different scenarios take place in your life. So we're going to look at this, what makes you unique, and some of that is your approach. Next is your perception to things, and then the choices you make. So this idea that there's your approach, your perception, and the choices you make. Now, if you're an individual and you're considering this, that's one thing. If you're on a team and you're considering this, then you might have some tasks and some things that need to happen, that everyone's doing some of the same thing, but everyone does it slightly different. And if they don't, it's not as effective. That has a lot to do with your specific, unique approach. And as long as the integrity of the movement, or the integrity of the action, is being held together, it makes sense. So it's one of the places that companies and teams get into trouble, is that they come up with these, SOWs and SOPs that are, this is how you do this moving forward. And it doesn't leave any room for the individual to adapt it to their own style and their own way of getting something done. And we lose some creativity. Now, in some instances, that's really what's needed depending on what the task is, but in others, it's not. And so that's one of the ways we really look at helping you move forward or helping others move forward, is to consider, what does that look like in the environment you're in? And there's a lot to it. The next thing we're going to talk about in the point from here on has to do with this idea of your human automation intelligence. Now, I was reading something just the other day where somebody was calling it AI, but they were calling it ancient intelligence, meaning that there is the wisdom of all time is available to us, and that the suggestion was that everybody is leaning on information that's thousands, if not more, years old, and it's all being spoken of in different ways, and that it lives within you, and that's ancient intelligence. There's what we call it is here is human automation intelligence. There is this way of communicating with yourself between your conscious and unconscious mind that will train yourself towards the result you want, where you can begin to gain clarity on how you want to naturally show up. You can purpose your critical mind with very specific watch guards to stay put and look for problems that might be happening that are based on how you're wired, and protect you in different situations. So, and you can watch for those and then create protocols, and you can purpose your unconscious mind and your conscious mind to work on that. Someone asked earlier today, we were teaching a class and to a group of coaches that were training to be coaches. They were working on getting their coaching certificates and licensure. So when, this idea about why use strengths, what does it matter? And it wasn't just about an assessment like CliftonStrengths. It was, why focus on strengths to begin with? And, the idea is that your mind naturally leans into critical thinking. Your mind naturally leans into what is risk. So a lot of scientists, neurologists, and other things talk about that. And even in trauma, when scientists and when psychologists come together and really study these things, what they're finding, they'll talk about what happens differently in our bodies and minds as humans, different from an animal, and how trauma is processed. And it's based on our frontal lobe and how we store things in the body. An animal doesn't have the same thinking capacity to store something and keep it, and they'll naturally release it when it's safe and when it's time. And oftentimes their whole body will shake. You'll see horses do it. You'll see, sometimes animals will fall down on the ground and just roll and shake it off that way. But as humans, we have the capacity to disconnect and not allow that process. So there's ways to unlock that. And it's, the idea with this automation is that if you can think a certain way and incidentally or accidentally end up in a situation that you don't really love, that you're wondering, how did I get here? Then you can be more intentional about that and begin creating that. So we think about the difference between humans and animals and how the brain works. Well, then we also look at archaeology. We look at the history, whether it's caveman or whether it's creation, of when there was a different type of threat or risk, right? We were concerned about things that would kill us. And our minds were constantly looking for potential threats. Well, today we don't have those same situations, but it doesn't change the science of how our mind works. And if we're not shifting and changing how we think, then we're still thinking in an ancient format that is ancient physically and not upgrading into a new way of thinking that has new threats. We talk about the threat of the saber-toothed tiger. If you think about caveman days, we were all, but there was a bigger concern about animals or creatures that might get us, attack us, kill us, might be a huge threat to ourselves and our families. Well, we don't have those same threats today. Today, it's other humans, it's processes, and then, we call it this cyber-toothed tiger now is potentially out to get you. So it's an entirely different type of threat to our minds and our bodies of what's happening. We're countlessly looking at what happens in the mind now, what happens in our chemistry as we check out and scroll and get in that death scroll of looking at social media. And the idea that we can be completely programmed and hypnotized through that process and controlled is extreme. And some people believe it at different levels, but experts have said that that's absolutely true. So depending on where you sit on that, or where you fit on that realm of how important that is to you or not, it doesn't change the idea that there's a different level of threat that's automated, and that you can choose a different level of automation and intention towards that. We we will consistently remind you in this show, and we will interview people and talk about this, where there is this new level of understanding of what's out there, and that if you can change how you think and use your perception to honor yourself, and to stay in a place where you're loving yourself, not discarding yourself, and really think through what you want, that you're adding detail to the character of who you are. That's the most underutilized resource you have today, is your mental and physical ability, especially in the US here, where obesity is such an issue, such a problem, which means our physiology, our emotional and mental resourcefulness is affected by our physiology. So there's a threat already in our decrease of resourcefulness. And what you're looking for is to increase your sense of resourcefulness and your ability to be creative and be in the flow of the spirit, be in the flow of information of how you're sensing and receiving things around you. How many things can you actually pay attention to and notice? The functional mind, our frontal lobe and our thinking mind, handles 4,000 bytes per second, and our unconscious mind is still unmeasurable. It's 40 billion bytes per second. So it's a huge difference in numbers. And you can use AI to look up what those numbers actually are and see how many different answers you might get depending on what you ask and how you ask it. But it's a massive difference between what we can process in the main part of our mind, and in our physical mind and our unconscious mind. So I'm looking at the wall where I love using whiteboards, and I have a bunch of stuff thrown up on the whiteboard. And the APC and the HAI, the focus on strengths, the idea of focusing on what's working versus what's broken. Back to that idea of how we think, and that we have our critical mind will always be working. And that answer of why strengths is that there's great sage wisdom in the world that talks about why to focus on what's working and what's good and what's positive. And if we focus on that, if your behaviors are, if you're really positively behaviored and you're doing pretty well in life and you're pretty satisfied, and say the worst behaviors you have are at a 50% of what you'd like. It's not terrible, but you could do better. And the best of your behaviors are at 80%. But you're feeling pretty good, right? There's not a whole lot of ups and downs. You're feeling awesome, and you're performing well, not a lot of complaints. And if all you do is focus on raising that 50%, looking at what's not working well and raise it, you end up with a narrowed performance. You might be working now in a narrower band of 70 to 80%. But if you focus on the 80% and raising that, what am I doing great? What am I naturally awesome at? And how do I rev that up and stay excited and stay happy and stay enthused and really boost what's going well and raise that? What's on the bottom will naturally come up with it. So now you're not only narrowing the gap, because you can't help but focus on what's broken, because that will drive you. That's going to nip at you and nag you anyway. So you can raise the bottom up, and it will naturally come as you focus on what's good. So by focusing on strengths, that's what works. So that's what this show is going to start talking about. There's a lot more to it here, but we're going to pick that up in other things. There's the science of motivation. We're going to have some of these episodes where we really dig into the company and the structure of an organization or a team, and look at how do you change performance collaboratively as a group? How do you create an environment or a culture and drive that culture into a group of people and make that more valuable and more important than other things? At Tag Inc., the owners has had a passion in his 36 years, 37 years in business now, he's had a passion the entire time for always making things better and wanting employees to be better, the entire company to always be better. So that's how has that been instilled into the company, is he's always invested a significant amount of time and resources into ensuring that there were programs available to staff and to clients that would help their teams improve and be better. When they were doing they were doing just this one type of audit that recovered missing dollars based on how the procure to pay process was working. And that was one major function of what started the company, was these types of audits. And even in that, he was always looking at, how do we help you now avoid these problems? And many people, he was going against the grain, and that people would say, wait a minute, you're going to work your way out of a job. And he never had that issue. He never had that issue. And he experienced over the years that things were always changing. Therefore, you were always needing to make the adjustments to what those improvements were. And that it was very difficult for these large organizations to not incidentally be taken advantage of by other companies in how that process worked, just based on shifting technology, changing technology. And in the human spirit of it, there was a lot of fears and problems and threats and misunderstandings of how that works. But in 37 years now of being in business, these guys have got it dialed in. And that culture of being better has been paramount through the entire length of the company. And it's still there, right? So what culture are you naturally driving no matter what? What culture will end up being there because of what you value to begin with? What culture do you want there that you're not driving into a group of how to begin to advance and enhance everyone towards a common goal and a common idea? And there's now more and more ways to measure it. You can't anything. It seems like anything that you used to be able to go and buy. You could go to the store. Do you able to go to the store and buy orange juice, and there was like one or two kinds of orange juice? I remember I could buy frozen orange juice, or I could buy fresh squeezed orange juice on the shelf. At some point, I could buy other orange things, and then I could buy an orange soda. So there became all these different types of orange. But everything's getting availability and increase of detail as to what's available in that. And the one area that you get to that you're not doing as well as you could is adding the you and your persona and who you are and how you approach life to make it have more ease and effortlessness in getting what you want out of life, or fulfilling your purpose based on what you think your purpose is. So the call now is for individuals to add that level of detail. And if you're working in a corporation, you're expected to advance yourself and you're going to be required to bring more to the table from yourself. And that is the answer of going up against the AI, because what's not available in AI yet is that human component, the humanities piece, the piece of why is one value over the other? Why focus, in one way over another based on the impact it's going to have to maintain or whatever it is that people need to want to buy your product or whatever. So innovation is getting simpler and simpler as far as that AI can do a lot of it for us in physical movement and putting things together. A lot of that can be done robotically and through AI. A lot of assessments can be done through AI, but what can't be done is understanding that nuance energetically that humans get to do. And we need you and the nuance of your genius to improve and bring things to a better place and not lose the relevance of who you are. We get what we focus on grows. So if you focus on fear of AI and being replaced, that will grow. If you focus on the channels between your conscious and unconscious mind and really pull yourself how you're meant to show up and be more useful and positive with your strengths, considering them more sacred and not just running forward with them, and not being a victim, not to circumstance of what's happening around you, we're going to have an entirely different world, and we're going to advance a million things. So this is the new realm of the point. Looking at the motivation of change, looking at the science of motivation, the science of change, looking at your authentic option and choice, looking at how you, the team, add value and have it feel easier. The old concept that hard for them to be worthwhile is a concept that's no longer at play. Most people that are still practicing the forward movement in a way where if it's not hard, it's not worth it, aren't doing it correctly, and they're not getting the results. So for you to allow your natural way and let go of the need for things to be hard, let go of the hero's journey, and just accept your greatness wired in how you were made and show up in that naturally, easily, and effortlessly. On guests, Upwill CRM expands, and as we have more coaches and we're deploying more coaches into companies to help them make exciting change and learn to have better services for their communities and for the people that they're serving. It's we're going more people interviewed, more discussions, and really talk about the meaningful world and the meaningful world of the people and how to make a difference. We're going to tell stories because that's the final piece shared yet, and that's that I'm showing up more and more as a speaker, and that is my way of sharing this news and of getting the word out of what the calls to action are, and then attracting companies to some of these new ways of measuring change and new ways of moving teams towards the change they want. And as we do this and demonstrate how quickly you can improve environments, improve results of groups through very specific ways of framing things, we're able to interview and talk about and bring vision, and we're going to tell stories. And in their stories, we're going to be you to come up with the ideas, what problems those stories can solve, what attributes and things can be utilized to benefit others. We're going to practice, and we're going to live stories you want to share. We're going to bring you on to share stories with us and do the same. We're going to practice how we tell stories, many, many ways we could tell stories and use the same story from different perspectives and gain more data points on humanity and on what really makes things work. I'm going to share a story. It's an old family story that was told from a patriarchal view. I tried it once on the point before. We're going to tell it entirely different. We're going to use some public speaking and aim a new way of sharing the story forward and get feedback. Give you guys an opportunity to say, does that really change how we look at the input of a new perspective that might have been the center point of the story? If we change the center point of the story to be that person's view, movies have been doing that for years. So if we do that here, what happens? And opportunity to move forward. We're running long in the tooth tonight, and we don't need to keep going, but we're going to keep moving here. We're going to keep sharing and keep promoting. The point is back. Maybe it's going to be called the point of, maybe it's the point of you and the word movement. What happens when you are your natural, wonderful self? But you are going to have an opportunity to consider and learn and dive more into the nuance of your genius and how that can impact the world in a positive way. We're going to stay great stations. So that's the point tonight. And I look forward to seeing you again.